So continuing on from the theme of the last video, I'm going to talk about Young Justice again. Except this time, it's gay. It's probably not going to surprise anyone that, in the first 2 seasons of Young Justice, there is no queer representation to be found anywhere. It was a kids' cartoon airing on TV in the early 2010s. Of course, it wasn't going to have canon queer rep. But things changed when Season 3 came out. It was 2019 and the show had moved to a streaming service. More than that, it obviously tried to age with its audience, taking on a darker tone and being more willing to show blood and even some gore on screen. I don't think it was too out there for the audience to hope for something more than headcanons and subtext. And we did get some, but, well, I wouldn't exactly call it stellar. The first proper on-screen representation we get is in episode 14, Influence, when Halo comes out as non-binary. And sure, like before this, we've had Batwoman, who is canonically a lesbian, appear silently on screen, and Vandal Savage's daughter Cassandra, possibly, if she's supposed to be this universe's version of Scandal. And some others that I missed, definitely. But they're not exactly relevant because, like with Calder in earlier seasons, the fact that the comic characters they're based on are queer does not mean anything if the show doesn't, well, show us that they are. So going back to Halo. I already talked about her in my last video, so I'll avoid going into all of the weird choices made with her here. Now I just want to focus on her as a queer character. Specifically a non-binary character. I'll go into the other stuff later. So her coming out is actually something I really enjoyed. I like the way the scene is written, I like how her gender is presented as not a result of her mind being alien, but of her being human and discovering who she is. I love how Megan and Brion react, I love how everyone reacts, really. They just take it in their stride and accept it as part of her. What I don't love is what followed it. Because that's nothing. Nothing followed this. She gave this one speech and that's it. We're done here. We've got canon non-binary representation. We don't have to do anything other than have her say it. Which is, I would say, not the move. You don't have to make a big deal out of a character's identity. In fact, it's better if you don't. But there is a difference between not making a big deal and outright ignoring. If I were to cut this scene from the season, there is nothing following it that would give anyone any idea that Halo is anything but a cis girl. And that is a problem, because nothing about the language used to discuss her changes. She still uses she/her pronouns, she calls herself Brion's girlfriend, there is no change to her wardrobe, everything is exactly the same as before she came out. Which is not to say that's an impossibility, because there are AFAB non-binary people who use she/her pronouns and are fine using feminine-coded language about themselves, but here it's not great. Because Halo is the only trans character on the show, so she unfortunately bears the burden of representing an entire community. Would it really have been so hard to just have a short conversation between her and someone else about her pronouns? Or have Brion ask what she'd like him to call her? Or, I don't know, have her use they/them pronouns? Or have something similar to what The Good Place does with Janet, where the fact that she's not a girl is something that the audience isn't allowed to forget because there's more than one instance of it being mentioned. Or maybe, just maybe, show her experimenting with her gender presentation. Change up her outfit a bit, see what she likes and feels best in. Because with how she is now, instead of being proper representation, she is functionally invisible. Which really sucks because she could have been great. How many queer Muslim characters can you name off the top of your head? I'm willing to bet not many, if any. But she's not a Muslim, and her queerness is ridiculously easy to sweep under the rug. And it's just, in general, real disappointing. The next taste we get of anything resembling queer representation is in episode 16, Illusion of Control, Except I would definitely call everything in this episode just such textbook queerbaiting, it's not even funny. And as a bonus, we're getting queerbaited from two different directions at once. On the one hand, we have Mist and Livewire, who've been giving off lesbian vibes pretty much all season, doing some coupley things in the background. And then on the other, we have Bart and Eduardo, who are really the main offenders here because they're not background characters. The episode's got things like Virgil complaining he feels like a seventh wheel while hanging out with two confirmed couples and Bart and Ed. Bart and Ed riding the bumper cars together in a direct parallel to what the confirmed couples are doing, Bart getting some cotton candy for Ed, or, well, attempting to at least.
Hey, it's a long way from the booth to here. I got hungry.
Some fond looks from Ed to Bart, and, this? Tell me that doesn't look like Bart just kissed Ed on the cheek. Like, yeah, if you slow it down and go frame by frame, it turns out it was just this weird cheek nuzzle, but all of this put together is enough to make me squint at the screen. But still, nothing confirmed. Which brings me to episode 18, Early Warning, which really just tipped the scales from disappointing straight into I'd rather just not have representation at all. Because this episode didn't even try. It just ran headlong into some of the worst tropes possible, and I'm a little bitter about that. So what happened? Well, there's this scene where Harper Row, Violet's classmate and friend, takes her out to the beach to shoot bottles and drink. The scene was already bad because of the points I went over in my last video regarding Violet and just letting her be Muslim for God's sake, but then they had to go and make it worse. They had to do this.
I have a boyfriend. So do I.
So why is this a problem? Well, it doesn't just fall into negative stereotypes so much as it takes a running start and swan dives directly into the deep end. First, Harper convinces Violet to drink. Then she kisses her without her consent. Then when Violet protests and brings up the fact that she has a boyfriend, Harper says so does she, and they kiss again. The first thing here is the predatory lesbian stereotype. And yes, I realize both of the characters here are probably either bi or pan, but that's still the relevant stereotype here. This fear of the evil, predatory sapphic coming to corrupt your precious daughters and pull them into their sinful ways. It's an old stereotype in Hollywood, going so far back as the days of black and white cinema, Dracula's daughter being one of the most well-recognized examples. Then there's the issue of presenting bisexual women, or bisexual feminine presenting non-binary people as the case may be, as inherently disloyal and promiscuous. You know, the don't date a bi girl, she'll cheat on you thing. This idea that you shouldn't date bisexual people, but especially women, because they'll never be satisfied with you and will inevitably leave or cheat. And by placing this event in the same context as underage drinking and playing around with a firearm while drinking, the creators are, intentionally or not, equating attraction between women, or people society would read as women anyhow, as something reckless and dangerous, a rebellion they'd be better off growing out of. Honestly, this might just be the single worst scene of the entire season. But it's not all doom and gloom. There is one tiny ray of light that comes to us in episode 20, Quiet Conversations, in which Calder takes Dolphin, a metahuman who can't breathe above water, to Atlantis. There, we find out that Calder now has a boyfriend, Wind, and as delighted as I am with this, there are some valid criticisms to be made, and I would be remiss not to mention them. The major one being that Wind used to be an Atlantean purist, which, yes, is exactly as bad as it sounds. Basically, they hold the view that they're the only real Atlanteans, and consider any Atlanteans with inhuman attributes to be impure. Yes, this would include Calder because of his gills. But to this I'd say that we don't know what's happened between when we saw him in the comics and when he made his appearance on screen. He's obviously abandoned the beliefs he held when he was a teenager, because he's not with the purists anymore, and also Calder wouldn't date someone like that. We don't know what his road was from there to here, but he's now trusted enough to be a member of the Royal Guard and work side by side with the Justice League, neither of which he would be allowed anywhere near if there was any fear of him having any loyalty left for Ocean Master, aka the King's traitor brother. Sure, his past is, unfortunate, to put it delicately, but Calder seems happy with him, and from what we've seen of him on screen, I'm inclined to like him. He seems like a solid guy. Even if some of his lines are, questionable.
I'll never get used to sucking and blowing like this.
Now they've just got to resist the urge to kill him. Which, to be fair, they at least avoided doing for the 3 other episodes following this one that he showed up in. And the final thing I gotta mention is in episode 23, Terminus, where it might have maybe possibly been hinted at that Dick had a crush on Wally. I mean, that's not necessarily what's being implied, but it's one of the possible readings of the scene, so I felt I should mention it, even if it's just in passing. Anyway, that's all for this video, thanks for watching. If you liked it, consider liking it and maybe subscribing. I will be back here Thursday after next. Bye!